landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Good morning and welcome to the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. I'm NASA's Sandra Jones and we're bringing you live coverage from Mission Control Houston of the upcoming return-powered flyby, in which Orion will fly behind the moon and perform a burn utilizing the Orbital maneuvering system to send it on a trajectory back towards Earth. This engine has been used numerous times throughout Orion's journey thus far, following Orion's launch atop the Space Launch System on November 26th. All spacecraft systems are performing well, now 20 days into the flight of Artemis 1. Today, we're in the White Flight Control Room, where Flight Director Judd Freeling is leading the team on console for today's flyby and burn. We do expect to lose signal of Orion as it travels behind the backside of the moon, as the moon will be blocking the direct sight to the Deep Space Network. We're tracking that loss of signal to begin at 10:41 a.m. Central this morning and will last 30 minutes. While in the loss of signal, the return-powered flyby burn will take place with the Orbital maneuvering system engine at 10:43 a.m. Central. This will be the longest burn of the mission so far. The burn will be 3 minutes and 27 seconds long, about 1 minute longer than the outbound powered flyby, where Orion was placed in a trajectory to head out to deep space. That burn occurred successfully on November 21st, and the outbound powered flyby sent Orion close enough to the lunar surface to leverage the moon's gravitational force and swing the spacecraft once around the moon toward entry into distant retrograde orbit. Following this, Orion remained in the distant retrograde orbit for one long elliptical orbit around the moon, lasting about 6 days. We're now on the return journey of our trip, and this last big push will bring Orion on the trajectory to head towards home. You are looking at a view of the moon, a live view, as well as the Orion spacecraft. Right now, Orion is 5,680 miles away from the moon. Orion is traveling at 3,800 miles per hour, and Orion is over 230,000 miles away from planet Earth. At the closest approach this morning, Orion will be about 80 miles above the lunar surface. That closest approach will occur when we are behind the moon in that period of a loss of signal. We're about 2 hours and 38 minutes away from today's return-powered flyby burn. Again, this burn will occur with the Orbital Maneuvering System engine, or OMS engine. This engine has been used for a variety of burns so far on the mission. And you're looking at a view here on your screen of the Orion spacecraft. That large engine on the very bottom of the European Service Module is the Orbital Maneuvering System, or OMS engine. This main engine is a repurposed Space Shuttle Orbital Maneuvering System engine that has flown in space many times before. It actually flew on 19 space shuttle flights, beginning with STS-41G in October of 1984 and ending with STS-112 in October of 2002. Now, the OMS engine is not the only engine on board Orion. There's also 8 auxiliary engines, which you see a few of here. Those are also located on the bottom of the service module in 4 sets of 2. Each of these engines can provide about 100 pounds of thrust, and these engines provide steering and can pulse on and off during burns. Again, this is a live view from the Orion spacecraft. Orion is 5,500 miles away from the moon, but closing in. At closest approach later this morning, Orion will be just 80 miles above the lunar surface. Orion has had quite the journey, now 20 days into this 25-and-a-half-day mission. Notably, during this flight, Orion beat the longest distance ever traveled for a human-rated spacecraft meant to return home. At its furthest point from Earth, Orion was 268,563 miles from our home planet. The views you're looking at right now of the moon are being gathered with the SAW cameras, or solar array wing camera. The solar array wings are those X-shaped wings that stick out of the bottom of the Orion vehicle, and they are used to collect solar power and distribute to the vehicle. But on the very edge of these wings, are cameras. As you rotate the solar array wings, you are able to capture different views of not only the vehicle itself, but also of both the moon and, earlier on in the mission, the Earth. If you're just joining us this morning, we are bringing you live coverage of today's outbound powered flyby burn. This burn will bring Orion in a trajectory to head back home for a splashdown on Sunday, December 11th. We are anticipating that burn to begin at 10:43 a.m. Central Time. But while we look ahead to the return-powered flyby, let's take a look back at some of the highlights from this historic mission so far. First up, we have the Space Launch System launching from Pad 39B at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida with its sights set on the moon. SLS blasted off at 12:47 a.m. Central on November 16th. Here you see the 4 RS-25 engines lighting up the Florida sky. And this video shows SLS and Orion's climb to orbit from the perspective of a camera on the rocket. It was about an 8.5-minute climb to orbit. And following liftoff and that climb to orbit, the translunar injection burn took place for Artemis 1. The TLI maneuver took place as the upper part of the rocket, officially named the Interim Cryogenic Propulsion Stage, fired one RL-10 engine, producing 24,750 pounds of thrust to accelerate the vehicle to more than 22,600 miles per hour, a velocity fast enough to overcome the pull of Earth's gravity and propel Orion out of low Earth orbit to send the spacecraft to the moon. The TLI maneuver precisely targeted a point above the moon that will guide Orion close enough to be captured by the moon's gravity. And right after that TLI burn, the interim cryogenic propulsion stage separated from Orion, which you did just see a video of that on your screen there. Later that day, we received our very first imagery of Earth, as well as completed the first checkout of the Orbital Maneuvering System engine, or OMS engine, which went smoothly. Orion was officially on the way to the moon, and again, that OMS engine is the same engine that will be utilized today as we bring Orion home. Now, several days later, on November 21st, Orion performed the outbound powered flyby burn with the orbital maneuvering engine as well. This video shows Orion as it approaches the moon for this burn. And following that burn, Orion completed its closest approach to the lunar surface, where it was just about 80 miles above the lunar surface. And then Orion completed the distant retrograde orbit, which enabled Orion to head out into deep space. Now, this photo that you're looking at on your screen was taken while Orion was in that distant orbit. And this was the furthest point that Orion reached during its mission. Orion was 268,563 miles from our home planet when this photo was taken on November 28th. Orion has now traveled further than any spacecraft built for humans meant to return back to planet Earth. And in this photo, Orion's solar rays split the difference between the Earth and the Moon on flight day 14. This image was captured by a camera on the tip of one of the spacecraft's 4 solar arrays. And just last week, the distant retrograde departure burn occurred, which placed Orion in a trajectory to exit distant retrograde orbit and head back toward the Moon ahead of RPF today, which we are awaiting and looking forward to. And here's some video just prior to that burn. And you can see Earth there in the almost center of your screen, right behind the solar array. So as you can see, Orion has had an exciting journey so far, but still a few days left in this mission. At this time, Orion is 5,191 miles away from the lunar surface. And we're under 2 hours and 30 minutes away from today's return power flyby burn. Again, this burn is slated to begin at 10:43 a.m. Central, and will be a 3-minute 27-second burn. Again, you're looking at a live view of the moon as it continues to close, as Orion continues to close in. Now, 5,058 miles above the lunar surface. Orion is traveling at a velocity of 3,933 miles per hour and is 234,000 miles from planet Earth. Now, in this image of Earth right now, we actually are able to view several Apollo landing sites rather. Of course, we are a bit too far away to make out any distinct features, but you are looking at the landing sites for Apollo 15, 17, 11, 16, and 14. And you are looking at a graphic here that shows a little more clearly those landing sites and Orion's path as it flies around it. Again, Orion is about 5,000 miles away from the lunar surface, so we won't be able to make out any details. And at its closest approach, Orion will be 80 miles above the lunar surface, still a little too far to make out any of those details. As we continue to get these great views of the moon, we did mention that NASA Flight Director Rick LeBrode is leading the team here in Mission Control Houston inside the White Flight Control Room during today's burn. But let's take a quick look at this video, which discusses the various flight directors of Artemis in a little bit more detail.
Flight CTO and flight loop.
Buddy, come for cooling status.
Flonico AOS, good for
Copy.
Flight controllers generally focus on systems, subsystems of the vehicle, and they're more in tune with the detailed workings of their particular system that they're responsible for. Flight directors, on the other hand, are more in tune with what is the integration between all of the subsystems. What are we all marching towards? What's our mission objective?
prop flight has the RCS holding together with the regs.
Really, your training starts when you become a flight controller. You know, you learn a lot by osmosis, and you kind of get a sense of a little bit of the job, but once you become a flight director, The amount of learning you do is exponential.
You don't become an expert, but you have to understand them at a depth where you could have the good conversation, ask the right questions to the experts who are the flight controllers. You spend a lot of time studying and then training, getting in simulations and running through all the motions and practicing the real-time situation scenarios in the training environment.
I am the ascent and entry flight director for Artemis 1. I will take responsibility of the vehicle after it launches. I'll also be the entry flight director, so once we come back to Earth, I'll have a team that will monitor and control the vehicle once it splashes down, and we hand that over to Melissa Jones, who is the NASA recovery director.
Splashdown. Touchdown verify. Copy.
I'm the lead flight director for the mission, really responsible for the overall development of the mission. We work directly with the programs. They provide us the mission priorities, and we build a timeline that's going to accomplish those mission objectives. We're responsible for building our team, getting our team trained and certified. We have a training team that helps us, but we have the overall responsibility for putting together the team that's going to execute the mission.
Confirmation of translunar injection burn cutoff.
When you go to a place like the Moon or Mars, you really have to be explorers. It pushes the boundaries of civilization.
We are having to develop new technology. It's going to have to sustain the astronauts for these very, very long trips. And it just makes sense to test that in going to the Moon, where you're in a similar environment, but you're much closer. And in the event of an emergency type scenario, we can bring them safely back home.
Station, this is Houston.
We've had a lot of experience now in low Earth orbit, over 50, 60 years of experience, and we've learned how to do that pretty well. We've learned what the effects of the body are in low Earth orbit, but there's still things that we need to practice, and we need to be able to understand how you sustain life further and further and further away from our planet.
It's just so different from everything you learn when you do low Earth orbit. And that's what's making it so much fun. I'm every bit as excited about this mission as I was the first day I walked in the doors of Mission Control.
Orion is now less than 5,000 miles away from the Moon, 4,833 miles away to be exact, traveling at a velocity of 3,966 miles per hour. We're 2 hours and 13 minutes away from today's burn. We're still targeting 10:43 a.m. Central for that burn. Everything continuing to proceed smoothly this morning as we anticipate the return-powered flyby burn in about 2 hours and 11 minutes. This burn will last for 3 minutes and 27 seconds and will change the velocity of the spacecraft by 960 feet per second. And this burn will also place Orion in a trajectory to head back home ahead of a splashdown in the Pacific Ocean on December 11th. The next major milestone here in Mission Control Houston is when Flight Director Judd Freeling will poll the team of flight controllers for a go, no-go for the burn. We anticipate that poll about an hour from now. We're just about an hour away from today's anticipated loss of signal. That LOS is slated to begin at 10:41 a.m. Central. We will not have signal with the Orion spacecraft during this time frame because the moon will be blocking any signal to the Deep Space Network. It's at this point that Orion will complete its closest approach to the lunar surface. That closest approach slated to be at 10:43 a.m. and just seconds later at 10:43 and 23 seconds a.m. Central will be today's return-powered flyby burn, which commits Orion to a journey back home. Orion is now 4,571 miles away from the moon, traveling at a velocity of 3,996 miles per hour. Everything continuing to look good this morning ahead of the return-powered flyby burn. That burn will take place 2 hours and 4 minutes from now and will last 3 minutes and 27 seconds long. The burn will take place with the Orbital Maneuvering System engine, or OMS engine, located on the bottom of the service module of the Orion spacecraft. This engine is capable of having burns that last less than 1 minute to more than 16 minutes in length. The OMS engine is the main engine on the European service module and provides the primary propulsion for Orion's major in-space maneuvers. The engine produces 6,000 pounds of thrust and is equipped to steer the spacecraft, and it can also be used in some abort cases to safely return Orion to Earth should that be required. The OMS engine is actually a repurposed Space Shuttle Orbital Maneuvering System engine that has flown in space before on 19 Space Shuttle flights, beginning with STS-41G in October 1984 and ending with STS-112 in October 2002. There are also 8 auxiliary engines on Orion. These are also located on the bottom of the service module and can provide trajectory correction. And there are 24 smaller engines grouped into 6 pods, which can provide attitude control as well. So in total, the service module has 33 engines. But today, for the return power flyby burn, we'll only be using one of those, again, the Orbital Maneuvering System, or OMS engine. Everything continuing to look good here in Mission Control as Orion closes in on the moon ahead of today's return-powered flyby burn. Before and during the Artemis 1 mission, we asked the public to share your moon-inspired creations with the hashtag NASA MoonSnap. We have received thousands of submissions, but here are just a few of them. This is a mural painted by Nikki Adams. You can clearly see the Space Launch System rocket as well as the Greek goddess Artemis, after which the Artemis missions are named. Artemis is the goddess of the moon and the hunt, and I think you can see her arrows and a deer included in the mural as well. Next up, we have a photo submitted by Jessa Rodriguez. The title is Ben and Sophia Plot Their Course. You can see the inclusion of Snoopy in his flight suit as well. Snoopy is our zero gravity indicator aboard the Orion spacecraft. And the Snoopy inside Orion right now is dressed very similarly to the Snoopy in this photo. What we see here is a 3D printed art piece from Terramoto. The artist entitled this piece Lunar Specimen 001 and used real data from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter to create this. LRO data is also being used to determine where astronauts will land on the moon during the Artemis 3 mission. And the last image we have to show you today is from STEM educator Susie Bennett. She taught her 130 students about the Artemis 1 mission and even got them to fill out boarding passes. There are currently 3.4 million names of the public flying aboard the Orion spacecraft safely stowed on a flash drive. Thank you to everyone who shared your moon-inspired creations with us. If you're interested in participating, just use the hashtag NASA MoonSnap. We're continuing to get some great imagery of the lunar surface here as Orion is 4,227 miles away from the moon, traveling at a velocity of over 4,000 miles per hour. This imagery is coming from a camera on the Solar Array Wing, or SAW. We expect to continue to get imagery up until the point that Orion does go behind the moon and is in that loss of signal period that we've discussed. That will be a 30-minute loss of signal period beginning at 10:41 a.m. Central Time this morning. And just 2 minutes after the LOS begins, or that loss of signal period, we will have the return-powered flyby burn occur at 10:43 a.m. Central, lasting 3 minutes and 27 seconds, utilizing the Orbital Maneuvering System engine. This is Mission Control Houston. You're looking at a telemetry-driven animation of Orion as it travels at 4,000 miles per hour, closing in on the moon, now 4,131 miles away. Orion is 234,940 miles away from home. Orion launched on November 16th and is in the 20th day of its 25-and-a-half-day historic test flight mission. Orion is an uncrewed test flight, but is performing critical checkouts of its systems ahead of a crewed test flight as part of Artemis 2. Throughout this mission, Orion has completed several milestones, including flying behind the moon once already as part of the outbound powered flyby. During that, a burn took place, which put Orion in a trajectory to head out to deep space. The distant retrograde orbit burn also occurred, which further propelled Orion into that trajectory. And Orion remained in deep space for about 6 days and broke the distance record during that time frame for the farthest distance from Earth traveled by a human-rated spacecraft meant to return home. Orion, at its furthest point from Earth, was 268,563 miles away. Following that, Orion hung out in deep space for a little longer, and just a few days ago we had the DRD burn, or distant retrograde departure burn. This burn put Orion on a trajectory to head back towards the moon ahead of today's return-powered flyby burn. Today's burn is critical to ensure that Orion is on the proper trajectory to return back to Earth safely. We are now 1 hour and 42 minutes and counting away from today's anticipated loss of signal as Orion flies behind the moon and performs the return-powered flyby burn, which will set us on a trajectory to return back to Earth and splash down in the Pacific Ocean on December 11th. But now, as you can imagine, this moment can certainly be a bit suspenseful as we await Orion to emerge from the backside of the moon and regain communications with the Deep Space Network. So let's hear from one of the INCO flight controllers about how much that is the case in this next clip.
During each mission to the moon, we'll have a period of time where the spacecraft goes behind the moon and we lose line of sight with the spacecraft from the DSN stations. That can be quite a nail-biting time. Usually we're executing an important maneuver or a burn during that time, and we have a predicted time when we should reacquire the signal, and so everybody is usually staring at that clock. As soon as the signal comes in-house, there's a sigh of relief, and we check to make sure that the burn executed correctly and that the spacecraft is in good health.
So again, we are anticipating that loss of signal to begin an hour and 41 minutes from now. Today's loss of signal will last 30 minutes in length, during which time Orion will complete its closest approach to the moon and just seconds later perform the return-powered flyby burn, which will last 3 minutes and 27 seconds and will change the velocity of the Orion spacecraft by 960 feet per second.